Hi, I'm Mark Cuthbertson, Councilman with the town of Huntington, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Mina Vicera, who's a landscape specialist with the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Suffolk County. And we're here in beautiful Heckscher Park, surrounded by many species of trees, to talk about the topic of tree health before we start the hurricane season. It's a great time to do that, and it's important to be able to identify healthy trees as well as unhealthy trees, and to know when it is best to have a tree removed by a professional. So with that being said, we're going to have a few questions, but delighted that you could be here.
Great, yeah, I'm excited to be here, Mark. Thanks so much. I love the opportunity to tell folks how to keep trees in their yard for a long, long time.
Great. So maybe the first thing is, how can I tell if a tree is diseased or dead?
That can be a hard thing for residents to tell. Usually the tree will start exhibiting symptoms of some sort. So if, we take a look at some of the samples that I brought today, if it's the summertime, then the leaves itself will start showing some symptoms of distress. So if we see it here, we'll see green veins, but then the rest of the leaf is yellow. And that normally doesn't happen. There are some ornamentals that will exhibit this type of look, but usually that is telling us something that the tree is under stress. You'll also see sometimes brown tips. Those are known as leaf lesions. If you see here, these are some healthy versions of leaves. So these are signs that the tree is telling us, look, something is up, I need some help. And some other examples, we have mushroom growth. This is definitely a branch that should not have this normal type of mushroom growth on it. Also, this is an example of a conch. And if we just kind of, attach it to the tree, normally what you'll see is this attached to a tree. And that means there's some sort of internal rot going on. And that certainly isn't a good sign. It's something where you want to get the tree evaluated. And the best evaluator is a certified arborist.
Great. So brown leaves, veins in leaves, and mushrooms, all signs that could be unhealthy. It may be time to talk to a specialist.
Correct. Yeah. Dead branches. Those are some other examples. Trees can exhibit all sorts of symptoms. So it's important to get someone who knows what they're looking for. Especially, since there are so many different species of trees and, so many different types of diseases, and then also insects. And then there's also the cultural practices. And those are the ones that residents have the most control over.
So you mentioned cultural practices and how you protect the tree. What exactly do cultural practices mean, and what are the most important ones?
Okay, great question, because it is very important for residents to know how to care for their trees, along with receiving assistance from an arborist. So what I believe are the main important cultural practices are the proper planting. So when you first introduce a tree to your property, it has to be properly planted. You want to make sure that the root ball of that tree is at the grade, the soil grade, not deep planting. A tree has a natural flare to it, and you want to be able to see that. That's called a root collar. And that's why it's very important to make sure that root collar doesn't get buried. Otherwise, you can introduce disease to that tree. Another important cultural practice, as I mentioned just a little bit ago, is the mulching. You want to make sure that tree is properly mulched, because when you apply water, another important cultural practice to that tree, the mulch will help make sure that the moisture level in the soil is at the optimum, instead of it evaporating away and causing all sorts of differences in temperature. And then finally, a very important but tricky cultural practice is pruning. So it's very important when a tree is young to properly prune the tree in order to get the best structure. So as the tree grows, it's better able to withstand strong winds or any type of adversity that comes its way. As the tree matures, you'll end up with the correct structure of the tree. And arborists understand what the proper structure of the tree, and really they should be the ones pruning the tree.
Are there different signs, whether it's winter or summer, as to a tree's healthiness? Because certainly there aren't leaves in the winter.
That's a very good point, Mark. So in the winter time, the deciduous trees, as they're known, they lose their leaves, right? So come spring, you expect those leaves to actually start popping out and showing themselves again. So if your deciduous trees, like your maples and your sweet gums, do not leaf out that can be a bad sign. You know, this past season we had Superstorm Sandy, and she deposited a lot of salt on our deciduous trees, and so that meant that there could be a delay for some of those deciduous trees to leaf out. So, you know, if your tree doesn't leaf out, say by July, because actually some of those deciduous trees, it was a pretty long wait for them to leaf out, then that's a very bad sign. And you want an arborist to come and check that out. Now, you know, if you want to reach up for some of those branches and explore them a little bit for those deciduous trees, I have one here. This is actually a dead branch, but usually it can be hard to tell in the early spring before they leaf out. You want to explore the buds. And if they look like they're about to leaf out, that's a very good sign. But if they look brown and brittle, just kind of break off the branch. And if it breaks off very easily, that means there's no water in that stem. And the branch definitely is not going to show any signs of life. So just continue breaking it back. And if it gives that little snap, that's called a snap test, then that means the tree is in some very much distress, and you want to get an arborist over.
So let me ask you, with that branch, just looking at it, there was mold on the branches. Is mold itself a sign of decay, or can there be mold and a tree is perfectly healthy?
Well, let me grab that branch again. So sometimes what you'll see on branches are another form of life, and it's called lichen. And that's actually a very good sign because it shows that the air is healthy. You have some lichen that can be very sensitive to pollution, but for the most part, lichen does not harm a tree. So I'm glad you brought that up. You do have the fungus that we showed earlier, and those are fruiting bodies that like to grow on dead wood. However, lichen can grow on various substrates. So usually that is not a bad sign at all for the tree.
Lichen, which really looks like it's mold, something you might see in a seaside area on the side of a house.
Correct.
That can be a sign that there's not, or is it necessarily an
that
unhealthy
it's fine.
sign?
Yeah, that it's fine.
When is a tree so far gone that it's a liability?
Well, you know, there's various signs to look for. So, for instance, if you have an evergreen tree, right, they have their needles year-round.
An example being a pine tree.
Correct, a pine tree or a spruce tree. And if you realize that the entire tree is beginning to turn yellow, then that's a sign that the tree is under extreme stress. It could be because of drought. It could be because of improper watering, you know, it was just planted, or if it's a mature specimen, meaning it's as big as these pine trees as you see around us, or it's been in the landscape for 20, 30 years, depends on the species, and it's showing that signs of stress of yellowing, then you need to get an arborist there to check it out. If there's just parts of the tree that are turning, grab another sample, that are turning brown, this is an example of a very common tree within the landscape on Long Island. It's an arborvitae. And you'll notice that just parts of it are turning brown, where you still have some parts that are green. Now, this is a sign of arborvitae leaf miner. So that's an insect infestation. So now, is this going to cause the entire tree to go into decline? Well, you want to, again, get a professional there, certified arborist, to come check it out. And usually the tree, you know, the tree, the shrub, the hedge tree, whatever, it can be treated and remedied. But the most important thing that needs to be stressed here are the cultural practices. And by that, the watering, the mulching, the fertilizing, the pruning. There's a certain way that that needs to be done so you don't cause stress. So then the tree says, hey, I'm under stress, you know, insects, come get me, or disease, you know, come get me, because that's kind of how it works.
Speaking of practices with trees and preservation, are there ways to protect a tree before a storm? Things that you can do preventative if we had another hurricane?
Yes, absolutely. Now, as you kind of alluded to, those are called best management practices. And some of the most important thing that you can do for especially a newly planted tree. So you have the newly planted trees, which can be anywhere from, you know, from a sapling all the way to 10 years old, in my opinion, to the mature trees. So for the newly planted trees, we'll start with that category first. You want to make sure that you water properly. Now, it would be great if rain could just provide all our watering needs, but that usually doesn't happen. We just experienced a very dry period. So you want to make sure that that tree gets about an inch of water a week. Okay. Yep. But that doesn't mean that your irrigation system is going to provide that sufficiently. So depending on the landscape, see here we're on a slope, and if you had a tree planted into this landscape, there's a likelihood that some of that water will run off. So you want to either apply a slow drip with a hose and let it stay on for a few hours, or they have these great tree rings or tree bags as well that will provide that slow release of water in order to get the entire root zone thoroughly watered. That's very important.
And I've seen that before, newly planted trees that are put there, those big bags, those help retain water. Is that the concept?
Yep. The purpose of those bags is to allow a slow release of water. So it will penetrate the entire root zone. There's a likelihood of it running off will be diminished. And the entire root zone gets water instead of just the top, 2 or 3 inches. You want that to go down, around 6 to 8 inches. So then the tree will grow deeper roots versus if you just do shallow watering, then the tree will just have shallow roots. And then if you get these periods of drought, the tree will become stressed out.
So what about home improvements? I'm going to do construction on my house. Are there measures that you should take to protect a tree during construction?
Yes, absolutely. It's very important. And a key liaison to protect some trees, because they can be a very valuable piece of the landscape, is an arborist. So, it's always important to have an arborist involved in your landscape to be the plant doctor, per se, to, maintain the trees. But what a resident can do is block off the area so the construction people don't hurt the trees. So again, you can mulch around the tree. That's even just something that should be done in general. Around 2 to 3 inches of mulch is all that is needed. Coarser mulch, the better. It doesn't need to be applied every year. But either way, that's protecting the root zone. So during construction or anything, that's what you want to do, is protect the root zone. So just, stake off the root zone to the drip line of the tree. And the drip line of the tree can be sometimes even 30 feet out, depending on the size and age of the tree.
Great. So cultural practices and an arborist, clearly 2 big takeaways today of the things that we can do to make sure that trees are healthy. Mina, I can't thank you enough. I learned so much in the last couple of minutes about healthy trees. We hope that this proves informative to all the people in the town. Hurricane season is coming up. Hopefully we won't have any hurricanes, but let's be prepared. Let's look at the health of our trees. Let's practice do some of these best practices that Mina has been nice enough to talk to us about today. Mina Becerra, the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Suffolk County, a great public asset. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Excellent.